Disclaimer. Please forgive me now, for there might be mispronunciations in this video. Rhode Island used to be known as the vampire capital of North America, featuring one of the most famous and known vampires in the United States named Mercy Brown. So today in this video, I'll be telling you some tales from the past of vampires of New England. The first recorded incident may have happened pre-Revolutionary era or during the American Revolution in Rhode Island. The story was not published until 1888, a century after it supposedly occurred. A dedicated farmer known as Snuffy Stukely lost 6 of his 14 children from a dark ailment. Not too soon after, his wife began to complain that their eldest daughter Sarah, who died first and probably from tuberculosis, had been leaving her grave at night to pester her in her sleep. The rest of the children who died also complained about seeing her before they perished. It was enough to alert the terrified townspeople and farmers. A dozen or more men stalked to the cemetery, where they dug up the corpses of 6 young people who had died from mysterious illness. 5 of the bodies were decomposed, but the last, Sarah's, who as I mentioned died first, was described as looking like Sleeping Beauty. Her eyes were open, her hair had grown, and fresh blood was found in her heart and in her veins. A tale says that they burned just Sarah's heart, but another claims that they cut out all 6 of the dead hearts and burned them on a rock in front of Snuffy Stukely's house. The visitations from the dead Sarah stopped, and the perplexing illness ended after one other child died. Between 1798 and 1799, a family from Rhode Island became plagued by a vampire. The head of the house was Stutley Tillinghast, and then there was his wife Honor, and their 12 children. By 1799, Stutley began to have nightmares. When asked about his nightmares, he said that he was working in his orchard, and at one point he would hear his daughter Sarah calling to him. When he was looking for her, he noticed that the apple trees had started to brown, and exactly half of the orchard dies. Not too long after, his 19-year-old daughter Sarah became ill and diagnosed with consumption, also known as tuberculosis, which she died shortly after. By spring, her 9-year-old brother James started to complain about chest pains, saying that Sarah had touched his chest. He soon died. Their sisters Andress and Ruth were the next to fall ill, each saying that Sarah would visit them during the night, complaining that she was cold. They too would die. By now, Stutley would visit his pastor multiple times to ask for help, but was told they could do nothing but pray. Hannah, Stutley's 26-year-old daughter, who was living nearby in West Greenwich, complained about visitations from Sarah after she started to spend more time at her family home. Hannah became ill and succumbed shortly after. Honor, Stutley's wife, started to also see Sarah, who would cry about being cold and lonely. Soon after, their 17-year-old son, Urze, fell ill just as he started to see Sarah at night while trying to sleep. One of Stutley's farm hands, Jeremiah Dandridge, spoke about a story he had heard of about the dead coming back to life to torment their family. Stutley, Jerry, and another farmhand started to dig up the bodies of his children who had perished, starting with the most recent. Each body was showing signs of decomposition until he reached the last, Sarah. Her body had not begun to decay and looked very much alive. Her face had a healthy complexion, though pale, and her eyes were wide. Her hair and nails had grown. They cut out her heart and burned it. Urza was far too gone by now and passed away. Honor, who had been sick, ended up recovering and having 2 more children. 29 years later, in 1827, a family consisting of Levi Young and his wife Anna had a bountiful farm, but soon became plagued with ill luck. Their oldest daughter, Nancy Young, at 19, became ill with consumption. On April 6, 1827, she succumbed to her illness. A month after, her sister Almira became ill with a similar condition. Levi Young called the best doctors in the region, but there was nothing they can do. One morning, Levi went to his daughter to find the girl up in her bed. Almira told her father that she was getting better, though she looked pale and weak from disease. Almira said to her father that she had dreamt of Nancy, and that she looked so bright like an angel. Nancy told her that the pain would go away soon. Giving up on conventional medicine, Levi went to local folklore of evil spirits from beyond the grave. He went to the town elders, and they agreed that the young household was being tormented by an evil presence and that it must be driven out. So a small group of townsfolk accompanied Levi Young to the graveyard. The leader of the group, named Nathan Doc Lennox, not a real doctor, but an expert in folklore and strange local superstitions. As the group built a pyre, Levy took the burden of exhuming Nancy's grave. By sunset, the apparently never opened coffin of Nancy Young lay burning on top of the pyre. Lennox advised the members of the Young family to stand around the fire so that the vapors from the blaze may cleanse them from the evils consuming their household. By the next morning, all that remained was ash. This seemed to do little to stop the consumption from ravaging the Young family. Shortly after the fire, Almira died of her illness. Within a few years, 4 more of Levy and Anna's children died of consumption. None of the remaining children were exhumed. During the mid-19th century, the Ray family of Jewett City, Connecticut, had contracted tuberculosis. The first fatality came with the death of 20-year-old Lemuel Ray in 1845. Not too long after, in 1851, his father, Henry B. Ray, died. 2 years after that, 26-year-old Elisha Ray, Lemuel's brother, died in 1853. 1 year after, in 1854, Henry B. Ray's eldest son, died from the disease. The family believed it was their deceased relatives that were causing the problem, so they exhumed their bodies and burned them. Juliet Rose, no, not the actress who played on Buffy the Vampire Slayer, but a girl from Rhode Island during 1874, was a daughter of the prominent South County family. But unfortunately, Juliet died from an illness, and was believed to return at night to draw the energy and blood from female family members. Her heart was cut out and burned by her father. In 1834, the eldest son of the Corwin family of Woodstock, Vermont, died from consumption. When another son became ill, townspeople of Woodstock advised the Corwins to take action against the vampire. According to the legend, the eldest brother was disinterred from the Cushing Cemetery and burned. His ashes put in an iron container and then buried in the Woodstock village green. From a tale, it claims that a few local boys decided to get together late one night and dig up the burned ashes. They abandoned their task when they started to hear screams and voices coming from all around. One source suggests that the town register does not contain any records about the Corwin family, who were born or died, held land plots, etc. in the Woodstock community, while another source claims that there is no contemporary account of the incident, only a newspaper story published 60 years after the incident was reported. In Exeter, Rhode Island, children used to be warned not to go near the Chestnut Hill Cemetery, particularly not near a grave of a teenage girl named Mercy Lena Brown. If they disobeyed, they were warned that even though her heart was slashed from her chest and burned on a rock, she could still rise from the coffin and drain them of their blood, turning them into a creature of the night. Mercy Lena Brown was a daughter of a farmer and horse trader who died January 17, 1892 from a possible consumption. She is still known as the Queen of Vampires, but she wasn't the first to die out of her family. It seemed that George T. Brown's family was cursed. The farmer's wife, Mary E. Brown, was the first to die from a mysterious illness that caused her to waste away in 1883. Then his 20-year-old daughter, Mary Olive, was the next to fall ill with consumption. She survived a grisly 6 months following the mother's death before she died too. An aunt who was believed to live with the family was the next to die from the wasting disease. And then Edwin A., the farmer's married son, got sick. Unlike the rest of his deceased family, he quit his job as a store clerk and rode a train to Colorado Springs with his wife to recover. Mercy died in the middle of winter while he was away. Edwin was feeling better when he returned to Rhode Island, but his health began to deteriorate again shortly after. He was diagnosed with tuberculosis. George T. Brown and some worried neighbors weren't sure the doctor knew what he was talking about when he blamed her illness and death on consumption. Only a few days after Mercy's funeral at the Chestnut Hill Baptist Church, reports began to circulate around the neighborhood that she had been seen walking through the cemetery and nearby fields in her burial clothes. New England was already amidst a full-fledged vampire scare that had been going on for decades before Mercy's death, so this only added on to their fears and hysteria. 3 months after Mercy's death, there was a council meeting. The town's leaders got together with her father, brother, and the local doctor named Harold McCaff, and came to the conclusion that a vampire, or vampires, were preying on the Browns, sucking the life's blood from one family member after another. They concluded that Mercy had become one of the restless and hungry undead. At the head of a group of 12 men was Farmer Brown, and they rode to Chestnut Hill Cemetery to rid the town of the vampires. However, when they pried open the coffins of Miss Brown and her daughter, Mary Olive, there was nothing left but bones and scraps of clothing. But when Mercy's casket was opened, something was out of place. She had been buried face up, but according to reports, she somehow turned and was lying on her side. Let's add that her body had been in a holding vault for nearly 3 months while they waited for the ground to thaw, and yet her body was well preserved. Her hair and nails appeared to have grown, and when one of the men prodded her chest with the edge of a shovel, fresh blood poured from her heart. Now fully convinced she was a vampire, Harold McCaff, the local surgeon, cut out her heart with the liver, toasted it with oil and vinegar, and burned them completely on a rock. As he did this, a sound like a massive sigh passed through the crypt. They filled the coffin with a mixture of boiling water and vinegar, covering the corpse, and then sealed the coffin once more. Something weird still occurs at the graveyard. People talk about a mysterious floating ball of light that hovers around Mercy's grave, or drifts among the other headstones. An interesting side fact: the young Mercy Brown may have inspired author Bram Stoker for his 1897 novel Dracula. After Stoker's death, his wife found newspaper accounts of the Mercy Brown case in his files. Many of these cases involve consumption or tuberculosis. This is a serious infectious disease that mainly affects your lungs. It can spread via tiny droplets released into the air via coughs and sneezes. Signs and symptoms include coughing that lasts 3 or more weeks, coughing up blood, chest pain, unintentional weight loss, fatigue, fear, night sweats, chills, and loss of appetite. I did read that in some severe cases, tuberculosis can change behavior, causing psychosis, which can result in visual and auditory hallucinations, delusions, and paranoia. It's rare and can usually be treated with medication. I researched on whether or not tuberculosis does anything to the body after death and found nothing. For a body to decompose can take 3 weeks to several years for a body to completely decompose into a skeleton, but factors matter such as temperature, humidity, presence of insects, and submersion in water or liquid. Hair and fingernail growth doesn't happen, but instead only appears to do so as the skin dries out. After about 8 to 10 days, depending on the preservation factors, usually the blood continues to decompose and the body begins to look unrecognizable. The body will begin to turn a deep red. What do you think of these New England vampires? Did you like this video? Want to support this channel and get early access to my videos? Check out my Patreon page where I create content on cryptids, hauntings, alien abductions, serious killers, and much more. Can't support me there? Like, comment, and subscribe here.